Welcome to the 5th edition of Quarantine Catch-Up. I'm your host, Tyler Rinaldi. As always, I am joined by Chris Famularo, and today we have a very special guest that proves punk is not just a phase. The very passionate Valentino Petrarca. Val, how are you doing today?
Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. Punk is not just a phase. I love it. Honored to be a part of the show. As I've just said, I've seen you guys on the previous quarantine editions, and you guys are really killing it with this podcast. So absolutely honored to be on.
Thank you for watching, bud. So how you've been feeling during this whole quarantine? I know we've been cooped up for 3 months so far. How have you been feeling?
It's been interesting. I think that I don't want to give myself hope, if that makes sense, because it could always come back. And those that know me know that I have really, really weak lungs, and I was in the hospital for a collapsed lung for 2 weeks straight, and my lungs just aren't really that strong. So that being said, I have to stay extra inside. I really, really can't leave. And I feel like if I just start thinking that, okay, well, in the fall I get to go back to school and I get to go back to work in person, and it doesn't happen, it's going to be like the floor is ripped out from underneath me. Mm-hmm. So I've been trying to take it okay, I will wake up today and I will do what I need to do today, and then I will go to bed. So it's a very day by day. I'm not end in sight at this point right now, which is very unlike me, but it's the only way I can get through it.
It's an obtainable goal going day by day. I think that's the only way you should really be doing it right now. But with that being said, like I said, we've been 3 months into quarantine. What have you been watching? What have you been listening to? I want to hear all about your media journey throughout this time.
So it's definitely been a lot. You guys know more than anybody that I'm not the kind of person that likes to slow down or really stop in any way, shape, or form. So I've had a very rigorous quarantine where I wake up early and I work out for an hour and a half while listening to podcasts. And then right after that, I do some reading, and then after that I might go skateboarding for a bit, and then I do work for a few hours. I really work as hard as I can. After that I will maybe learn some history a little bit. I've been trying to get more involved in history. I know nothing about history, so trying to get a little bit there.
You have a good teacher with Chris Famularo that could help you out.
Oh shucks, stop
it. I definitely might need it. Then I've been listening to an album a day, and then after my album I watch some kind of movie in the night, some kind of TV show. I catch up on that. And then the last part of my night is I spend an hour on screenwriting and an hour on songwriting. And I rinse and repeat every day and do those. Obviously,
I think Val you might do more in one day than I do in a week. That's incredible that you're able to do that much in one day. I mean, knowing from your work ethic from the year that we spent at Seton Hall together, I mean, just seeing how active you were in your desire for music and media as a whole. I mean, I've been able to see you grow as a professional now with all of the work that you've been doing between PTV and WSOU. I mean, you've really impressed me how it comes to just your straight up professionalism and how you're able to handle interviewing such big name personalities, especially on the WSOU side. I mean, you've traveled the country to interview some serious bands and some serious performers when it comes to the music side. So can you explore a little bit about how you've gone through that process when it comes to, it having to be over Zoom now? How do you go about that?
Yeah, so that is something else entirely. And obviously if I have an interview of some kind, then that daily schedule kind of gets interrupted a bit. But I will say this. 99% of my body and soul and everything, every cell in me is I want quarantine to be over. I want to see my friends. I want to do stuff, all that. But Skype quarantine interviews have been the best interviews I've ever done. And a part of me doesn't want quarantine to end, a very, very small part, just because of how absolutely incredible the experience has been. You guys know that interviewing artists is kind of one of my favorite things to do because I love music with all my heart. As I just said, I've been listening to an album a day for the last 4 months or whatever. And it's been getting, I love, music is a huge part of who I am. And so interviewing artists on a professional level, the best way to describe it is when you're doing research and you're watching other interviews to see how they talk and their mannerisms. Doing one in-person interview of some kind is equivalent to watching 500 of them because you just get who they're about. Just by interacting with them, you understand what they're about and kind of their personality. But the reason that Skype interviews have been so incredible is 99% of the time, an artist is doing an interview for press or for some kind of promotion. So they're promoting a tour or an album of some kind. And if it's a phone interview, they'll call you between sets. They'll call you as they're, moving stuff. They'll call you, if they're in the middle of moving their equipment or whatever. And you have like a 20-minute time frame to get your questions in and wrap it up in a nice, neat little bow. Whereas in quarantine, they're doing nothing. And the time limits are very, very loose. And furthermore, content and personality wise, like you guys know from doing this podcast and interviewing people, you can gauge how interested someone is and how their enthusiasm is changing. And you have to kind of save the interview if you feel that their enthusiasm is dipping below that point, or you know what I mean? Like, it's all about that connection aspect. And artists have been stuck at home for 3 months with no one but their wife and their kids. And they're just dying to talk to anybody that's not like, their immediate family. And it's been incredible. I know that I had an interview that was supposed to be 20 minutes. And when he called me up, the artist literally said, listen, I'm in a 1-bedroom apartment with my wife and my 1-year-old screaming child. So take as long as you want to take. And it was just like the most like, all right, that's all you got to say. I'm ready to go.
That's awesome, because it's nice to see, because you really put your passion into your interviews. You do a lot of research. You do really love the music that these people are putting out. What has drawn you to this type of music, whether it be in the past or something in the recent memory that has gotten you to love and appreciate their music so much?
It's kind of interesting, because as a kid, I didn't really like music that much as a young kid in early junior high, just in the time frame, I would listen to a song or two, but I wouldn't really like love it.
Yeah.
But what happened was, when I was in, I want to say 7th grade or 8th grade, I think it was 7th grade, I had just gotten a girlfriend, and she was like, yo, I love Fall Out Boy. And I was like, oh, okay. And I remember thinking in my head, like, okay, I'm going to listen to a ton of Fall Out Boy and impress her. And next time I see her, I'm going to be like, oh, I know Fall Out Boy too, kind of thing. And it quickly became like, I listened to all their albums and was like, I actually love this. Like, it was one of my first times experiencing a record from start to finish, like from beginning to end, and like soaking in all these songs. And I think the reason that like pop punk and punk music as a whole is my background is because in those formative years in my life, I was listening to like that pop punk, that all that stuff. And quickly from there, like, as you guys know, the journey took off, where it's just like, once you get into Fall Out Boy, you get into Panic at the Disco, you get into Pierce the Veil, you get into Sleeping with Sirens, you get into Bring Me the Horizon, and you slowly starting to get into more heavy and obscure bands and local bands and other punk bands. And it just like, it's a trickle down effect. Mm-hmm. And the journey never stops. Like, I'm still learning more about music and about everything day by day. But it's just funny that I started to impress a girl, and now it's come to a point where it's my life now. Like, it's 99% of what I care about.
Well, I mean, kind of bouncing off that, you say it's your life, and right now you're heading into your junior year at Seton Hall. I mean, you were just given a brand new position at WSOU. I mean, you want to elaborate on that a little bit? You say it's your life, and it's hopefully the direction you keep going if you're good at it. So why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I just got a promotions director at WSOU, and it's been unbelievable. Like, I'm loving every second of it, but I will say I was dealt a weird hand with coronavirus. I won't say a bad hand, because I'm extremely fortunate and very happy to be in this position, but I was dealt a weird hand because 60% of my new job is scheduling concert ticket giveaways on air, doing all concert promotions and getting our name attached to like concerts that are coming in the area. So no concerts because of coronavirus. 60% of my job is kind of null and void. 20% of my job is scheduling merch orders and making sure all the merchandise of WSU gets out and all that stuff. Because of coronavirus, we can't really ship anything out right now. So that's kind of like null and void. And then the other 20% is like bartering with small businesses and like trying to get like, oh, if you want, your ad to be, pay us a certain amount of money and we'll put your ad, or not pay, but you know what I mean? Like a lot of bartering and working with these businesses. And businesses just opened up now, and they are nowhere near to be on their feet to like actually, you know what I mean, get promotions. Like they're just trying to stay afloat right now. So technically, in theory, I could just be sitting around doing nothing, but you guys know I'm not. I've been trying to reinvent the wheel, and I've been trying to think of creative solutions. Doing a lot of like social media giveaways, a lot of like digital download code giveaways, a lot of like trying to get tickets to live streams and giving those away, like, you know, the live streams you have to pay for. And I've been really, really giving it 150%, trying to find a way to be a successful promotions director where it's historically the worst time to be a promotions director.
And it sounds like you're doing a great job. I mean, you're dealing with the cards that are dealt, and you're still making the most out of the opportunity. And I know you're going to run away with this opportunity. Another opportunity that you ran away with was being host of Under the Stars. And I know that's something that's near and dear to your heart. As you say, you like to listen to new music, you like to listen to local music. What are some of the things that you love most about being host for Under the Stars and really delving into this pop punk genre?
I love all genres of rock. I love heavy metal. I love post-hardcore. I love punk. I love folk punk. I love like classic rock. I like sludge metal. Every single subgenre of rock I have some appreciation for and I love. But pop punk is my favorite. And again, that's probably I was bred on pop punk. I was born on pop punk. Like, you know, my first record I ever heard in full was Fully Ado, and like by Fall Out Boy, and like just like it always has a special place in my heart. And it's the only thing that can genuinely make me like 100% happy, I think, is that like, I know it sounds a little cliche, but there's definitely, whenever I hear any kind of pop punk song, it's such a calming experience. And I remember in high school when I was going through the hallways, like might have like 2 seconds between classes, and I'll put on my headphones and I'll just like, because you weren't supposed to have headphones in the hall. Yeah. I'll just like put them on for like just to hear like 3 seconds of a pop punk song from Fall Out Boy or from The Story So Far or Neck Deep or, you know, Knuckle Puck, just to hear like a snippet of it. And even just like that 3 seconds was enough to push me through the rest of the class. And be like,
that little rejuvenation that you need to get through the day.
Exactly, and be like, all right, I can handle whatever's going to happen now.
Of course.
Kind of thing. So Under the Stars has kind of given it a home, you know what I mean? Because before it was just a big, huge hobby, and now it's actually a tangible thing. So
one of the last times I was in the station was when you were hosting Under the Stars and you were conducting an interview, and you were talking to, I believe, Taylor. She wrote a book about the history of pop punk and everything like that.
Yeah,
and it was really interesting to hear to hear you at work, both hosting and interviewing. But it was also interesting to just see a group of people really get together about something they truly love. And she was saying how New Jersey is one of the epicenters of pop punk. So you're from Rhode Island, as some people know. How is it coming down to New Jersey and going to places like Starland and a couple other places where you're hearing these pop punk bands in their home state and everything like that?
Oh, I didn't realize how bad I had it until I got to Jersey. Because here's the thing with Rhode Island, and like no offense to, you know, Rhode Island venues or whatever and the Rhode Island people, but first of all, no band ever comes to Rhode Island, A. B, when they do, the crowd sucks. They're just standing there. I remember I saw Paris in Rhode Island. They're not really pop punk. They're more like kind of indie alternative emo. But when I saw Paris, it was a sold out show, and it was like tons of people in this venue, and they were just standing there, and there was enough room between us that I could just kind of like move my shoulders. It wasn't like there was no, you know, when you're at a show, you want to be packed in like sardines. You want to scream every single word. Yeah. You want to crowd surf. You want to mosh. You want to kind of really experience it on a full body level. But like Rhode Island, like the shows are always just mediocre. And I've been raised in Rhode Island for my whole life. So I love Rhode Island. Rhode Island is incredible with nature. It's incredible with the sights. It's got amazing beaches and oceans, but its music scene is in no way, shape, or form thriving. Mm-hmm. And even when I go to Boston, like I'll go to a lot of my shows in Boston. First of all, it's like a 2-hour drive. And when I do go, it's always a fun experience, and it's always a lot, but it's just like there's a certain level of magic to that Jersey punk scene and that Jersey pop punk scene. And when I first saw my first show there, it was Neck Deep at the Starland Ballroom, was my first Jersey pop punk show. And the environment, it felt like an MTV music video where there's like people just like on top of each other, like just grabbing each other's heads to crowd surf, and like in the mosh pit, like someone would get thrown on their back. And like, it was like, it felt like I was in a movie. And every single show that I've seen at Jersey or New York, even in the New York area too, that gets overlooked a lot with the pop punk scene as well. It's felt like so rich and like that's the home. That is the epicenter of pop punk and emo. And it's honestly just incredible. Since then I've gone to, oh my God, I think I just passed my 104th concert right before quarantine started.
That's amazing.
So I've been to 104 right now, and I think like at least 60 of them were in Jersey. So,
what has been your favorite concert within Jersey? I know you've said you've gone to Starland Sea, Neck Deep. Who else have you enjoyed within New Jersey?
That's tricky.
Or maybe your favorite WSOU Presents show, whatever it may be.
I think in terms of my favorite show, that's hard. I think every show has their like different merits and their different awesome stuff that, you know, kind of goes with them. But for me, a backstory behind me is I have been consistently trying to see Sum 41 for like, I want to say about like 8 years straight. And what happened is the first time I bought a ticket and my car broke down while driving to it. The second time I bought a ticket and my ride canceled the night before. And the third time I bought a ticket and there was a death in the family and I couldn't go. And then the fourth time I was going to buy a ticket, but something happened and it never worked out. And so consistently, every single time Sum 41 has been trying to tour, I have wanted to see them so badly and it never worked out. But they came to New York once and it was at the Hammerstein Ballroom. I think it was like in 2019, this fall.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember thinking like, I'm going to try to go, but like, I don't think it's going to happen. Like the odds are kind of stacked against me. And even like getting there, like the Jersey Transit was delayed like 3 hours. And I was like, yeah, it's my luck. It's not going to happen. Like I'll try, but I'm going to probably walk in and the show's going to be, the lights are going to be off and it's going to be great. I was actually able to get there just as the opening band finished their last song right before Sum 41 came on. And I got to see that whole show. And that was like, it was such a like a yes, finally, like I got this, you know, that was like the best feeling in the world. But there's been also some other shows that have been pretty cool too. I have like a list of every concert on my phone. I'll have to check it later and maybe give an updated one.
I think that's a really great answer. And you get to watch these shows of the people that you grew up listening to from when you were younger and everything. And now you're also getting to interview, like we were saying. What's some of the interviews that really have either shaped you as an interviewer or was just a great experience getting to talk to a band that you really love?
I've got a few answers for that one. First of all, I've been meaning to say this, but it's like I keep forgetting. It's definitely weird to be on the other side of the microphone. Just like every single time I'm like doing this sort of thing with the headphones and the mic, I'm always like the one conducting. So it's super cool to like actually be on this side. But I think the best interview, technically speaking, the one that I edited the best and just sounded the most crisp was probably the Silverstein one that I did very recently. I think that all my skills from the last interviews I've done have just really helped me, and I was able to do that a lot and very well. The most surreal one was probably A Day to Remember, where my music transition went from like Fall Out Boy to A Day to Remember, and then ever since then, A Day to Remember has been like in my top 3 favorite bands of all time, like forever. They've been one of the bands that has been, I think A Day to Remember was, if I had to pinpoint it, they were the band that cemented why I like music. And like everything I like about music is in that band. And they mean so much to me. And my dad actually, for my 16th birthday, he bought me tickets to see A Day to Remember opening for Blink. And I love Blink-182, but I was there for A Day to Remember.
Yeah.
And I remember it was lawn seats and they were still like, you know, $60. It was crazy, but they were all the way in the back. And I saw them as little like blinks on stage, like little blobs. Like I was looking at the stage and they were just tiny little people playing. And I was like having the best time of my life. I had pictures of me losing my mind at that show because it's A Day to Remember. And actually, funny enough, at that show, I ran into Spencer from Iceland Kills just like around. Like I saw him walking out of the venue. I was like, I like Iceland Kills is my number 1 favorite band in recent times. But yeah, that show was incredible. But fast forward a few years, I get to interview A Day to Remember, and it got confirmed the night before. So I didn't think it was going to happen. And then just like universe timing, it just kind of all worked in that way.
Yeah.
And I was so nervous, and I was like, you know what, just calm down, because I've worshiped this band for years. It's not like just another band. Oh, they're big, but I think I got this. It's like they're big and I love them. So I had to like level my anxieties for a lot of it. And then what made it even funnier was the tour manager, when I got to the venue, we did the interview on the balcony, like banisters above the venue. So I'm trying to pay attention and interview him as I'm looking down, and I see like the crowd beneath me, like 100 feet beneath me, and the banisters kind of swaying very slowly. And so I'm nervous about like that. I'm nervous about the interview. And then midway through, Beartooth walks in, like just past me, and I'm trying to like focus, and it's just, there was so much going on, but that was the most surreal, I think. And then,
sorry, go ahead.
No, then the other one was probably Spanish Love Songs for best content. You know, best content, most surreal, and best technical. Sorry, continue.
I think it's pretty cool just hearing you be able to elaborate about your experience. And all three of us and a lot of our colleagues, we all have at least one kind of similar experience from our time in these groups at Seton Hall. I mean, yours is more so with WSOU, but I know for a fact, Tommy and I, the first time that we went to the Big East tournament at Madison Square Garden, like that was my first time ever being in that building, let alone being there for a sporting event. Like I'd never been in Madison Square Garden. And just the fact that we got to go there with Pirate TV and we were there to see our college team play, but we were seeing, you know, like national figures in sports media. You know, there were commentators and play-by-play people, and we were meeting head coaches from around the country. And it's just interesting to hear you, you know, get to talk about music you grew up on and that really shaped your musical sphere, and then being able to interview them at a professional venue. It's so exciting as a person who is your colleague to see you get to grow professionally and talk about your experiences like that. I think that's one of all of our favorite things, is to talk about our experiences that we had from college and our opportunities that were given to us. And it's just awesome to see you growing from the freshman I saw you, where you were just so eager to do everything, and now you're promotions director and you have like hundreds upon hundreds of interviews and experiences under your belt. It's so exciting to see you talk about it.
Yeah, and I think that you're right. And one of the things that doesn't get talked a lot about the college experience is that college is bridging the gap between your dreams and what you're actually going to be doing for a career. And, you know, when you're in high school, again, I'm sure when you were in high school, you dreamt of Madison Square Garden, and everyone knows that venue. And then college is kind of the link between actually going to Madison Square Garden. Like it's such a special time frame because it is the stepping stool for your career. You know what I mean? And I mean, I remember you've told me that story before, and it never ceases to amaze me, because those that know me, I don't know sports that much. I've never watched a full sports game start to finish, but even I know the Big East tournament. You know what I mean? Even I've heard that name multiple times. So to like cover that in a professional setting, again, it's bridging the gap between who you want to be and who you're going to be.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. And it's really shown that you're a man of passion, whether it's about these interviews, about going around the country, going to concerts and everything like that. Another one of your passions, I would say, is movie and film. How would you like to really combine your two passions of, you love watching and making movies and everything along those lines, and you love doing interviews, you love talking about music and all that. How would you like to meld that and really bridge that gap, like you're saying, and make that link throughout your college career?
That's definitely tricky, because those that know me best know that probably my biggest character fault is I want to do too much, and I do too much, and I never like slow down and stop. But I ideally would love to either edit or write movies of some kind. And even if that's like music videos, I know that like I thought about like directing music videos would be a good like bridge between the two. It's just, and I know, you know, I do enjoy some of the cinematography, some of the directing, and some of the, pre-production, but that's not where my interest lies. Specifically editing and the script writing. And I noticed that I have a little bit of editing experience, but I don't have really that much script writing experience. That's why during quarantine, I've been writing a lot of movies. And I've been trying to write a lot of movies, short films of some kind. And yeah, it's really, really hard. Like, I know it's like, yeah, it's like, no crap. Of course it's hard. You know what I mean? Kind of thing where, yeah, but it's like when you have like a blank page in front of you and you're like, how do I do this? Mm-hmm. It's tricky. But one of the things that's helped me is every single piece of, whether it be a TV show or piece of movie that I've watched since quarantine started, I have to come up with at least 3 things why I liked the writing or why I didn't like the writing. And I feel like that's kind of helping me a bit,
Yeah.
kind of navigate this. And you know, I love music and I love movies, and both are, you know, a huge part of my life. I'd love to find, like, I know Ice Nine Kills, they have 15-minute music videos, 3 minutes is music, and the rest is just story. You know, like that would be a dream come true. But yeah, it's been interesting. Onto the script writing aspect a little bit. I'm going to touch upon that. I think the thing that I struggle with right now the most is stakes and, like, particular character danger, you know, stakes. Like conflict, I'm kind of getting the hang of. Character development is actually easier than I thought it would be. And like dialogue isn't terrible, but the stakes is something that I think in a lot of movies, they don't particularly do it well. And one of the things that I did was I was like, you know what? I'm trying to study how to do stakes correctly, how to write a short film or a film that increases this level of intensity as the film goes on. And I went back and I watched a lot of the films from the 50s and the 60s because they had to increase stakes where there was no CGI. There was no special effects. And watching stuff like 12 Angry Men, watching stuff like Harvey, stuff like even like Dr. Strangelove, How I Learned to Love the Bomb. These are all movies that I've watched in quarantine and I'm absolutely fascinated with, because the stakes in the film are being raised simply by character dialogue, simply by the way that they're talking to each other. They're increasing the atmosphere and the danger. And, you know, and there's no plot devices most of the time. There's no other things happening. It's just the dialogue as the story progresses and the way that the characters interact that is increasing the stakes of the story. And I think that is just, you got to give 50 cinema props for that, 50, 60 cinema, kind of those two eras, because it's unbelievable.
I think the greatest thing you can kind of take away from that, and Tommy and I had taken a lot of similar film classes during our time at Seton Hall together, and I'm sure you will as well, or have already, but it's kind of when learning that and wanting to craft your own story, you kind of understand that not all of your stakes have to be sky high. You know, it's not, you don't have to deliver this huge, overwhelming force to really make your audience or your viewer feel the problems that the character is going through. You know, so Dr. Strangelove, in theory, that is a massive, overwhelming problem. You know, it's like it's literal nuclear war that is being threatened upon them. But the true problem of Dr. Strangelove is just the poor lack of communication from point A to point B. You know, it's like they're just trying to get the message from one person to the other, and it's failing at every point, and that's what makes that movie so great. It's a hilarious movie, but the stakes are still there. You know, you have this overwhelming grandeur of nuclear war, but the real problem is the fact that nobody can pick up a phone properly and make the call. You know, I think that's the thing, is when it's coming to writing your story or crafting your story, and when you're storyboarding, is not everything has to be this tidal wave of problems. You know, some of the best movies get away with just having such a simple problem of like one person not being able to tell another person their problems. And that's, as growing up as an adult, you realize how hard communicating anything can be. You know, it's like, and that's where a lot of the greatest movies come from, real life situations, is because truth is stranger than fiction, and you don't need to overemphasize life, because life is hard enough as it is. So, you know, just from there, you can just take your personal history of some simple problem that you could either find funny or sad or makes you angry, and you could just realize that it might have been some simple problem that created it. You know, it doesn't have to be like, oh, my world is going to fall apart if I don't get this done. Like, no, I might just not ever talk to that person again. And that could be really sad, or it could be angering, or it could be releasing. You know, it's not everything has to be huge. Sometimes a small gesture is worth 1,000 big ones.
And that's what I'm noticing when I'm watching like modern action movies, specifically action movies from 2010 to now, like the last decade. Most action movies, I'm wondering why I don't care about the characters or the situation. And I think you're right. It's because most of it is the bomb is about to explode and destroy the whole city, and that's the whole stakes throughout the whole film. And it doesn't we've seen it so many times, so it's already a cliche to begin with. But second of all, they don't do anything else interesting with the stakes. And I think specifically in the action and the horror genre, those two genres in particular, stakes are the most important thing in those two genres, because it's what composes the second act. That second act of that film is all stakes and increasing the stakes. And that's kind of where it needs to land the most. And I think I'm seeing that in particularly, that's why I don't enjoy a lot of like action movies. I know I saw the new Jurassic Park recently for the first time. Not Jurassic World, Jurassic World 2, I think it's called, or something like that.
Fallen Kingdom, yeah.
That one. And I think that one was a huge one that suffered from that complete lack of having intriguing. First of all, I could go into a myriad of problems with that film in a million different ways, but the biggest one of them all, I think, is hands down just the plot didn't have any real danger, and I'd never felt that the characters were in legitimate danger. And that's another issue that I think we could touch upon as a whole. Is what are both of your thoughts on, like, particularly in stakes, you want to make it feel like the character is actually in legit danger. And I think that's why Game of Thrones has done so well, is because these characters could very easily die and you'll never see them again. Whereas like in Jurassic World, they're not going to kill off Chris Pratt. They're not going to, you know what I mean? No. So he's going to survive. Of course he's going to survive, kind of thing. Like, I think that in making and writing good storytelling, you need to actually have legitimate fear that the characters could get killed off. What are your thoughts?
I think
go for it, Tommy.
Okay.
I just ranted.
Yeah, I think what you're saying about horror movies, especially, and that new age horror that we're getting people from, like a Robert Eggers or I can't think of the other one.
Jordan Peele.
That too, but it's something that's very, very
grounded. Ari Aster.
Yes, thank you. That's exactly who I was thinking of.
I know.
Because recently watching things like The Lighthouse, watching Midsummer, watching Jordan Peele's movies, Get Out, and Us, they're very realistic things and things that we actually think about. And that's kind of what we've talked about in the past with something like Black Mirror. It's something that's very real to us, and turning that on its head and making it a slow burn. And I think that's a big difference between movies in the 50s and 60s, like you were talking about, and movies today, is everything back then was very slow and deliberate, and watching back on them, it kind of gets boring to a certain extent, but that's because they're more of character studies. They're more of these things that are slowly eating away at you, when today everything's quick cut action, everything's jump scares, everything's things of that nature. So it feels gimmicky instead of feeling earned when you actually get to that point of a big scare.
And social media plays a huge factor in that. Literally, social media is designed to shorten our attention span. Like, now I know most of my friends, like, they're on TikTok. And if there's a TikTok that's 60 seconds, it's too long and they won't finish it.
Yeah.
And so, like, that is literally designed to shorten our attention span. So you're right, those slow burns are tough for a modern audience. What do you think, Fem?
Well, I think both of you bring up interesting points, but the main thing, I guess we're going to focus on horror here. I'm not a huge horror movie person, but I do enjoy like suspenseful films and stuff like that. And whenever talking about those genres, I always refer back to Alfred Hitchcock, because you could look at a number of his films. I mean, most famously Psycho, but even looking at Rear Window or Birds or
Vertigo.
Vertigo, thank you. That was the other one I was thinking of. Like every single, you saw the motion that I did. It was, it's an all-encompassing act of Alfred Hitchcock being a wonderful creator, and it's not just in his script, but it's also using mise-en-scène as well as sound to capture all those feelings of the viewer. And this is kind of something Tommy and I were talking about a couple podcasts ago, where it's using everything on screen, which is what we're taught. It's using diegetic sound, non-diegetic sound, your lenses and stuff like that, but I'm getting off the point. It's going back to Alfred Hitchcock's films, it's all realistic problems that eat away at you. Psycho is scary because, yeah, it's a murder film, but the whole time when you meet Bates, it's like, what is going to happen? Like, why is this so creepy? Because in all reality, if you take away the sound in that movie, any sound really in horror films, but like you take away the sound and you put color to that film, it probably wouldn't be that scary. But it's the use of all of your creative devices as a writer, as a director, as a director of photography, as a sound engineer. It's using all of your devices to really encompass the viewer and your audience in what is truly scary and what comes to the senses. So when transitioning to modern films like Jordan Peele's films or Ari Aster's, Hereditary was so scary because while it is a paranormal film, everything that was happening is stuff that people experience in real life. Those are hallucinations. Those are things that people experience on a regular basis. Things that are mental illnesses that can create those kinds of things. And Jordan Peele's, it's more of a social dialogue, but it's also real because all of us have been in a social setting that just doesn't feel right. And there's that small part of your brain that's like, we need to leave right now because this is not okay. Something is wrong. I don't know what it is. Everything seems fine, but I don't feel okay. And that's what's so scary about Get Out, is that whole movie it's one social commentary, but it's just a preliminary warning from start to finish. It's being aware of your surroundings and second guessing yourself, and doubt is a huge problem in that movie. And throughout it, it's constantly, the main character Chris is constantly questioning everything going on, and I think that is a really scary thing. As a person going through a questionable scenario, doubting yourself is something that can really overwhelm you, and that's scary, and that can be scary for the viewer, and it was, and it is, and will continue to be. So as a story creator, I think basing real life actions off of something that isn't so significant and then making them significant is really a good way to go when it comes to crafting a scary scenario.
And like two things. First of all, you're so right that mise-en-scène is such a huge factor. I forget who it was. I'm so mad at myself for forgetting. But there's this one famous horror director that says, if you want to not be scared in a horror movie, don't cover up your eyes, cover up your ears.
Yep.
Yes, because it's the sound effects that actually increase a lot of the suspense in a lot of horror. And then before I even get into my next point, I just realized that in my coffee cup, I thought I had used a spoon, and it was actually a fork.
I saw that.
It just kind of stabbed me in the eye just now, and it caught me off guard because I didn't realize that it was a legit fork. I just thought it was a spoon. So that's, yeah, I got to watch out for that.
That's fantastic.
Why is the fork upside down?
Yeah, that's a good question. And the worst part is, you'd think I'd know by like stirring the coffee that I would like pick up on it, but I guess I was just in like autopilot.
It happens.
It'll happen.
To continue off of that point, I think that's something that's really poignant in horror movies today, is leaving it in the mind of the audience and not treating your audience and spoon feeding them and everything like that. It's treating them with respect and that they're intelligent and everything, and making them kind of figure out what's happening, and not showing the gore of someone being killed or something, but allowing their mind to kind of come up with what's actually happening, because sometimes what happens in your mind could actually be worse than what they're showing you. And I think that's a really interesting point.
Yeah, and like, I mean, horror movies are my personal, like, one of my favorite genres of movies. I don't think I could have a specific favorite, but horror movies in the top two. And it says the guy in the Freddy Krueger shirt that was supposed to be like a Halloween costume, but I've just been like, no, this is my regular wear attire. I wore this for Halloween 3 years ago, and like just randomly I'd be walking around like the Seton Hall campus like, it's a Freddy Krueger kind of day. But as much as I love horror movies, I think one of the biggest things is, right, like, first of all, don't show the monster, because a lot of what makes stuff scary is in the unknown. That's why we're afraid of the dark sometimes, is we're not scared of the dark. We're scared of what might be in the dark, lingering in the dark. And it's one of the biggest things that I've noticed with modern horror is they focus way too much on the monster and how horrifying the monster is, when in reality, real horror, as Pham kind of said, to kind of piggyback off that point, comes in everyday situations and real life stuff. So I noticed, like, I love Ari Aster and all of his films, and I love Robert Eggers too, because like in Hereditary, the horror is from the family as they're dissecting each other and they're really getting mad at each other and the family is falling apart. That's where it's scary. In The Lighthouse with Robert Eggers, the horror isn't in like the sea creature demons. It's in their relationship and how they're starting to just like lose their minds slowly and with each other and get more angry at each other. Every day, like horror, all right. When horror is built into character relationships and character development, that's when it's like mind-blowing, like, and incredible. And that's when it's known for being good horror. I think it has to be weaved into that character development and character relations.
I totally agree with that. Yeah.
I think the biggest falling off for when you can see, like, Paranormal Activity is probably my go-to for when you have good horror and bad horror, because it happened in the same series.
Yeah.
The first Paranormal Activity was renowned for how scary it was, and like worldwide viewing, and was just celebrated for how good of a horror film it was. And then they just continued the trope of moving things without you seeing what's moving, or people getting possessed, and completely lost what made Paranormal Activity was so good, was just the fact that the viewer didn't know what was going on, the family didn't know what was going on, and they just relied upon true horror effects to really make it scary. You know, it was sound, it was darkness, it was mystery. It wasn't, you got to the third Paranormal Activity, you're like, all right, this is going to fly then, or this person's going to fall over at this point, or some, like, and trailers for horror movies ruin them. It's, you know, you just, everyone complains about trailers ruining movies, but I feel like horror as a genre really suffers the most when it comes to it, because if you display at least two of the scariest parts of the movie, you've ruined your movie. You know, it's so upsetting to see a movie get ruined by a preview of what can scare a person in that film, because then you can expect what kind of horror is going to happen. So
another franchise that has kind of ruined itself, I think, is the Saw franchise. I believe the first Saw is actually really well done, because you don't see any of the killings. Everything is off screen. It's kind of left to your imagination of what these contraptions could actually do. But then it got into the torture porn version of everything, and it progressively just got, in my opinion, worse and worse, despite whether you like the story or not, because they're showing you everything that's happening instead of just letting it happen and letting us consume it the way we, the audience, might interpret it differently.
And like specifically in Saw, that's another prime example of how good horror can be weaved into character relationships. The two people that are trapped in that room, one's chained to the bathtub, one's chained to, I think it was a furnace. The whole movie is them interacting with each other and trying to figure out how we're going to get out of here. And like they kind of grow almost a weird, like messed up friendship in that, you know what I mean? And it just, horror is, Saw, in my opinion, is a prime example of horror, again, that started out strong and went really, really bad, because then it just got rid of all character relationships completely, and then it just kind of went to that, again, that torture porn, gory kind of thing. And another thing with Saw to kind of keep in mind is that Saw is one of the franchises that, and I want to stress this from a screenwriting perspective to anybody watching or listening. If one of your films has a twist, every film doesn't need to have a twist. It's okay if one of your films doesn't have a twist. I think with Saw specifically, like I saw Jigsaw, and I know that there was a few other ones that had this example, because the first one had such an incredible plot twist at the end that you're like, oh my God, holy crap. They felt the need to do that with every single one, and it did not work. And again, it's so much better to have one really awesome plot twist than to have a ton mediocre, kind of garbage ones. But to kind of go off of the trailer aspect, trailers, it's a very fine line to walk, because you want to make sure people come see the movie, but you also want to, like, you know, not give away too much. Horror, I think, is the worst, you're right, the worst genre to promote, because horror relies on mystery and the unknown. And if you give away some of the known, then it's not really that good of a film. And movie trailers, in my opinion, have gotten so terrible, so incredibly, we could have a whole nother conversation on that, but movie trailers they've given away very key important lines. Like even like in garbage movie, not garbage, but I gotta be careful kind of who I slant. You know what, I'm gonna say it, garbage movies, like Venom, you know, garbage movie. I'm gonna say it.
I kind of agree too, so.
Yes, I don't want to anger anybody, but I'm gonna be upfront. I don't like Venom. The most important scene, like the final scene of the movie, is the first scene of the trailer. That's unacceptable. That's unacceptable. Like when I saw that was the scene that they closed out the film with, I was like angry. I was like, this is ridiculous. This is insanity. Like, oh.
The one exception I kind of have to the rule that you guys were talking about was It Chapter 1. It showed some of its biggest scares, but because of the way it was made and the way it was set up, to me, the biggest scare is when Pennywise is in the corner when Beverly's in the bathroom, and you turn and it's just a jump scare. But I felt like that was an earned jump scare because of the way they set everything up. And I think that's the difference between the horror movies that are good and the horror movies that are bad, is having a good setup to whatever scare you're going to show the audience. Because if you just have this lazy thing of just building up the music and it's just going to be really loud and in your face, then it's nothing. But if, like you're saying, you're connecting to the characters and you're connecting to the story, and then all of a sudden something happens that affects the characters and you, then it's something that's earned and rewarded, and you actually walk out of the movie theater being happy about it.
Well, it's like if you go back and reference, it's kind of interesting. I've been thinking about this while we're having this conversation. If you go back and look through the progression of horror movies and their tropes, you know, there were character horrors when you have things like Halloween and, you know, Nightmare on Elm Street and the Jason movies and stuff like that. And you kind of got to the 2000s where it was a lot of paranormal horror. You had Paranormal Activity, and you had, what was the J.J. Abrams horror movie?
Which one?
Giant Monster. You never see it. It's shot in not first person, but found footage style. They made like a bunch of them now. Why can't I remember
The only one I could think of is Blair Witch, and I don't think that's it.
No. All right, it'll come to me at some point.
I want to say Boo Medea Boo, but I don't think that's right.
Yikes. Yikes.
Scariest movie of all.
Cloverfield. That's the name of it.
That's the one. Okay.
Cloverfield, yeah.
Cloverfield, like paranormal stuff like that, you know, and kind of going off the aspect of you don't see the monster and stuff like that. And now you're getting into like 2010s-ish, later 2010s of horror where it's kind of, I want to say situational, but
it's intellectual.
It's more tense horror than it is like jump scary or paranormal or gory or anything like that. But referencing back to like the character horror of like the Screams, which is obviously a parody on horror, but it's a genuinely scary movie. Like when it comes down to it, because it's theoretically a situation that could happen. And that's what makes it scary, is the fact that most of the movie, you don't know who is Ghostface. You don't know why they're doing it, but they're just tormenting people. And that's what makes the original Halloween so scary too, is, I don't know if you guys have watched that recently, but I watched it within the last couple of years, and I noticed you see Michael Myers so much more than you would think. Like, not in a scary sense, but in like, he's just in the background. Like, he's driving in cars in the edge of the frame, or he's walking behind people in the edge of the frame, and he's just menacing. He's just a menacing...
He's a shape. He's not Michael Myers. If you look at the script of that movie, he's referred to as a shape. He's not a person. He is this entity. And I think that's something that's really interesting. But going into like movies like Cloverfield, you get this big monster type movie, but then the next movie, you get that character study of 10 Cloverfield Lane, where it's these three people dealing with a situation and not really trusting anyone. And it, like you're saying, it's feeling that as if it's your own. So Michael Myers is behind you. Everybody's had that feeling where someone's behind me. I should turn around, make sure no one's there. Or I don't know if I trust this person because things that they're doing or saying are kind of weird, making me off put and everything like that. So I think that's a really interesting point.
And that's, I think, what the remake of Halloween did so well, is like when the most recent remake with Jamie Lee Curtis and Judy Greer, I think her name is. Yeah. They did such a great job because, like, it captured, that was actually what I noticed when I was watching the remake, was it captured that feeling of just someone stalking in the background. There were so many shots where you just saw through Michael Myers' like little eye lens holes, and you just hear breathing. He's just breathing as he's looking around. And Michael Myers, believe it or not, in the original, he doesn't like kill that many people. It's just him being like there. And it's just that creepy presence. And I love that. And to kind of reinforce what I've been saying, I think good character development and good character relations is what makes a good horror film. That's why the first It was so incredible. And that's why, like, again, we're talking about Cloverfield. Like, that second Cloverfield that was more of a character study, in my opinion, was so much better. I just think that the best horror and maybe it's not even like that the best horror comes from character development and character relations, but when you have strong characters with horror mixed in, it's more of an entertaining ride. You know what I mean? And that's one of the things that like really, really bad horror movies suffer from. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm a huge slasher fan. I love those original, like, those slasher flicks with like, just Jason just going around, just like killing everybody. Like it's fun to watch. It's fun to watch. Yeah. But a lot of those slasher films, the characters are so painfully undeveloped and furthermore, just painfully stupid. Like they're just dumb characters. And like, not even like just they make dumb choices, but they're just like dumb people. And it makes it hard to empathize. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of what makes a good horror film good is you want the character to survive. You want them to get out alive and be okay. And if you do character development so badly that you're just like hoping that they all get slaughtered, you've failed at your horror film.
And I think the difference is really if the people that are making it care about it and they're trying to make a well-made thing instead of just a cash grab. And that's something that we've really seen recently with Blumhouse films. Jason Blum is a huge producer of all these movies. He makes them for about $5 million. And if they get 10 plus million on opening weekend or whatever it is, the movie's considered a success. And then that's how they push out all these different movies. Through Jason Blum, we've gotten some really good horror movies and we've gotten some god-awful horror movies. Do you think that system, while it's a really good business thing for himself, do you think it's either helped or hurt this world of horror that we're living in with the new movies coming out?
Hurt. Definitely hurt. And the reason I say that is because there's some people that have like weird entryways into horror, and if their entryway into horror is one of the bad ones, then that's not like, I actually do feel bad for anybody that's getting into action movies now, because action movies is another thing that's a whole nother issue entirely, is that action movies are notoriously terrible in the 2010s. And I know that horror movies were kind of funny how they swapped, where horror movies were notoriously terrible in the early 2000 to 2010, but now from like 2010 to now they're really good, and action movies is the opposite. But I just think anything that makes the original less good is not a good film, because it makes me feel bad. Like that's why like I like actually almost like cried when I saw Glass, because Unbreakable is one of my favorite movies ever. And after seeing Glass, I actually like Unbreakable a little less, and that was the worst feeling in the world. That made me genuinely sad. Like I remember just feeling this like sense of like gloom of like, you really messed this up. And Glass is super interesting in and of itself. Just a quick side tangent is how the biggest thing I learned from Glass was the third act of your movie is most important because it's what you're left with.
Yep.
Because
exactly.
I loved Act 1 and 2 of Glass. I loved like the first and second act I thought was incredible. It's just that third act was so painfully horrible that it ruined the whole movie and Unbreakable for me.
Yeah, I've seen a ton of movies throughout our film classes and just in personal watching where I might not have liked the first couple minutes or whatever it may be, but pushing through a movie and finishing a movie, it could be very rewarding if you do get that third act of just really high tension or really interesting stakes or whatever it may be. So I definitely understand that point. Kind of flipping on its head, we started with you talking about your routine. One of the things in your routine was listening to an album a day. And I think that's a feat that not many people are passionate enough or determined enough to do, but we got the man, the myth, the legend to do it himself. So what have you been listening to with these album a day listens for the past 3 to 4 months?
So I love emo music and I love pop punk, but I want to know more about the roots and the scene as a whole. So what's interesting to me is there's, right now, as we know, 4 or 5 waves of emo that people have distinguished. And I personally believe that there's like 5 waves, but that's up for debate right now. And the first wave of emo is in the early 80s to the early 90s. And that is called emo core. That's the only one that has a specific name for it, called emo core. And that is essentially punk music with emotional lyrics. Because if you remember, punk music originally was just F the world, F the government, this is all, screw everything, was kind of punk. Emo core took that punk sound and those punk elements, but they had emotional, introspective lyrics. Stuff like, Embrace, Rites of Spring, and even some of Fugazi was like very more internally, like a lot of their lyrics dealt with, I don't feel happy and I'm sad and I don't know why kind of thing. And that paved the way for a lot of other like bands to come. And that was your first phase, the first wave of emo. And originally the first wave was really kind of like trashed. Emo was actually like almost like a music slur where people would be like, oh, it's just emo. It's like it's garbage kind of thing. And that stigma didn't let up until like 2010. Like that stigma of emo was so strong. And emo core stands for emotional. And again, a lot of people have argued with me, like what good music isn't emotional, but that's something entirely else. That second wave of emo starts from the early 90s to the early 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
And that wave of emo is when emo started to get more melodic. No longer do you have that like punk, like fast jolting 2-minute songs. It's actually like the guitars are more rhythmic. It has more of a flow to it. And that's when you get that signature emo whine. A lot of emo music is characterized by the whiny vocals. And that's when that started to kind of pave the way. You got bands like Mineral, you got bands like Sunny Day Real Estate that kind of paved that. And when you go back and listen to it, it almost sounds like mathcore almost in a way, where it's just kind of like that cool, weird, twinkly stuff. But that was that second wave of emo. And then you got this third wave of emo, which I call the Renaissance of emo, which is essentially emo is mainstream. You've got Taking Back Sunday, Census Fail, Brand New, all like even like some Fall Out Boy. They're more pop punk, but they had some emo. Like this is when emo was popular and people loved it. And all those bands are really awesome and famous, and they're just a characteristic of the scene. But then there's a lot of debate if My Chemical Romance is emo. There's like literally like there are threads and threads and threads and threads all across the internet with people just fighting with each other. Personally, I do think emo music can evolve and change its sound as it's done in the past. So while My Chemical Romance doesn't have that signature emo whine or that signature emo guitars, I think it's still emo. But I will say that it peaked with them because after they came around, it never got that level of popularity ever again. Almost like they did it so good that no one else could reach that point. Mm-hmm. My Chemical Romance was an emo band that could sell out Madison Square Garden in 2003, 2005, 2006, and now. Like they're just that huge. And then this fourth wave of emo is kind of in the 2010s of Movements and all that stuff. And, and then, Movements, Boston Manor, and Spanish Love Songs, the band, are kind of that fourth, fifth wave of emo. That being said, I know I just gave you a huge mouthful of like the history of emo music and pop punk. But the reason I say that is because I primarily have only listened to fourth wave and a little bit of third wave of emo, primarily. And as someone who calls basically the genre a religion, it's like it's a sin to me that I can't even that I don't know a lot of this. Yeah. And despite knowing the bands, the fact that I don't know a lot of the records, it wasn't sitting right with me. I almost felt like a little bit of a fraud, if I'm being honest. I felt like a fraud for a time frame when I was talking about that, but I haven't really heard a lot of it. And this quarantine, the first thing I noticed was I have more than enough time to dive into as many albums as I want to dive into. And I could do an album a day and I could just get so much off this. I have a list on my phone right now of bands I need to get into. I think it's like at 350 something right now of all these bands I need to listen to and get into. And quarantine has just given me the perfect opportunity to really, really dive in and just kind of dissect that. And I'm definitely very, very happy with it. And there's some stuff, I'm talking a lot, but I'm just going to,
no, you're fine.
Sorry for the mouthful.
The whole point of this.
You're the guest.
Thank you. But another thing that I've been doing is I've been getting into some indie because, like, I'm into the 1975. I'm into some Tame Impala, but there's not much other indie rock that I'm super into, so I'm getting more into that. And even just, like, classics. Like, I'm ashamed to admit this, but I went my whole life never hearing Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band or never hearing a good majority of System of a Down's Toxicity. Stuff like that. Where like, yeah. And
that's
I remember, I know. And because it's just the kind of albums that you see a million times over and you go, well, I'll get to that when I have the time. And you never have the time to just like, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so what I've been doing is sprinkling in a lot of the classics with a little bit of indie and then a lot of emo. And that's kind of like been able to catch me up a lot. And there's still some bands, like, if I'm being honest, I haven't really listened to that much of the Sex Pistols. I really got to get more into them. Like they're a band that is another classic that I haven't really dived into as much as I should. Mm-hmm. And A few more just like punk bands I want to get more into, but that's like the album of the day thing, and
Yeah.
it's cool.
That was an awesome history lesson.
I was so amazed the entire time.
What has been the album that has surprised you the most? What have you liked the most out of your quarantine listening?
That's tricky. You know what? I'm gonna say. All right, I'm gonna say a weird one. So, I love Taking Back Sunday, and I've loved a lot of their earlier work for a long time. But I didn't listen to a few of their albums because I've been told that they're horrible, like that they're just like outright bad. And everybody universally like it's not even like a weird contest. Like a lot of people on the internet, like, oh, this album is the worst album you'll ever hear. Just don't listen to it. And I'm like, okay, I won't listen to it. I listened to every single Taking Back Sunday record, start to finish. Same thing with Silverstein and all that stuff. But I think it's 2009 album, New Again. The reason I liked that one so much was because I thought that I was going to hate it, and I loved it. Like, the choruses are catchy. The guitar work is swift and smooth, and it just flows. And it's got that signature Taking Back Sunday lyrics, and that, like, it's the perfect mixture of punk and, like, pop punk, and it's got those emo, like, tinges to it, and it just I loved it. I thought it was a phenomenal record. I thought it was absolutely incredible. And everybody, I'm the only person that I know that loves this record. Everyone I've ever talked to hates it. You know what I mean? Like,
is that a weird feeling for you? Because I know personally now, especially with social media and everything, it's very easy and accessible to find almost everyone's opinion on new music and old music and stuff like that. And I'm sure all of us have different opinions on all kinds of music, but it's kind of interesting when you, like that example of when you have a piece of music or a project or an album or something that you really like and then the majority of people don't like it. Like, I find that to be a weird feeling because it's almost like, well, am I wrong for feeling this way? And then you're like, no, music is art. It's subjective. Everyone's supposed to interpret it their own way. So I guess my question is do you feel weird having that opinion of it is a universally disliked album? Do you feel weird liking the album?
Yeah, well, my 24 setting is weird. My just backpedal is like weird, but I think honestly, no. The first time I finished it, my initial reaction wasn't even like, "Am I weird?" I was like, "Did everyone just hear the same album that I just heard? Like who?" Yeah. I was almost like, "Are you guys like deaf? Like what? Like what do you mean? Everyone hate?" And I'm not even kidding. There's 2 records that I know, just 2 albums that I am the only human being that I've ever met that loves these records. And those 2 records are New Again by Taking Back Sunday and Screaming Bloody Murder by Sum 41. Those 2 albums, I have never met another human being that tells me I love those records. And I don't understand why. I don't get it. I mean, like, it's not even like that I feel weird. Like, oh, it's like, how are you not, like, loving this?
How do you not like what I like? Yeah.
Yeah, how do you not listen to this and get so excited about it? And I've gone on record by saying, though not their best, Screaming Bloody Murder is my favorite Sum 41 album. There's a difference between their best and my favorite. But, oh my gosh, yeah, I get a lot of crap for that. I get so much crap for that.
Do you think it's because people are comparing it instead of embracing it for what it actually is? I've seen that in some of the music I like. I'm a big Justin Timberlake fan, and his first 3 albums were classics in the R&B space, and then his newest album, Man of the Woods, no one other than my family likes it. So I love that album personally. I think it has a lot of really good hits on it. Do you think that's the issue, is people are comparing it to their past work instead of just embracing it for what they're trying to adapt to?
That's a huge issue in music as a whole that I've noticed, is that a lot of people, and I agree, I think you when analyzing a record, you should A, compare it to their past work, but B, also judge it on its own. And there's some records that, like, I hate in, like, a band's discography, but I like the album kind of thing. And I just think that was the first album that Sum 41 didn't even try to do pop punk. Like, Screaming Bloody Murder is straight up a theatrical. It's like the Black Parade by My Chemical Romance if it was more punk and less, like, theatrical, you know what I mean? But, like, it's more theatrical than Sum 41. So the whole album sounds like a murder mystery. That the whole album, that's what I hear when I listen to it. It's like a punk murder mystery with some Black Parade sprinkled throughout. And I think that was just probably, you're right, when people hear Sum 41, they want those, like, pappy skater punk vibes of, Fat Lip. They want to hear the Hell song. They want to, like, I can understand why if you're turning that on and you hear like blood in my eyes, you're going to be like, oh, this is weird. But I think that, and maybe I'm just like a really open, there's very few albums I dislike. I'm a very open music person. Like I should say open in the rock scene. Like when I hear a rock album, I always give it the benefit of the doubt, and I always want to love it. And it kind of takes a lot for a record to make me admit that I don't like it or hate it. Just because I think I'm optimistic when it comes to listening to music. Do you guys feel the same way, or are you more like pessimistic with music?
Well, I think if you're pessimistic going into music, you're not enjoying music. You're kind of looking for something to complain about. I feel like music is such an interesting medium for art because, like I said, it's subjective, but it's also the most, let me reword this, it's the art medium that I think comes with the most prerequisites or the most preconditions of something, of what people expect. Like when a band becomes, or a performer becomes popular from a single or from a debut album or an EP, that is what is expected of them every time after that until they make a standing change. Like, a good example for me in the music that I listen to is Childish Gambino. Very clearly has been making artistic choices in the type of music that he wants to make, and it was Awaken My Love, which was a straight up R&B soul album in comparison to, he had more of a pop rap vibe, or straight rap vibe, but he came out with Awaken My Love and there was no rapping on it. It was all singing. It was soulful. It was beautiful. And originally I was in that mindset of like, where's my Childish Gambino? Where's this rap that I love? And where is this like bumping to music that I want? And then you just kind of stick with it and listen to it and listen to it and listen to it. And you understand what they're going for, and you take away what you're supposed to, and you take away from what they gave you. And I feel like if you don't go into a new album or even an album from an artist that you recognize, you have to go in with an open mind because they're an artist. They're allowed to interpret their feelings in whatever way, shape, or form. You should be optimistic about music, because if you're not looking for the good in it, then you're just going to be unhappy from the start. And I feel like that's a really dangerous way to explore music, which is what I admire so much about you, Val, is you're literally looking for how emo and punk came to be what it is when you found it. That's something not a lot of people do. People just listen to the music from when they found it and they go, that's it, that's the stuff, that's what I like, I don't want to hear anything else. You're literally going out like, how did it get this way? How is it that the music found its way to this point in my life? And it's an admirable thing.
Thank you. And I really do appreciate that. And I agree 100%. I think there are a lot of people I know, and even if with artists they love, like, oh, I know this album when it comes out, it's going to suck. And one of the things that drives me crazy, and I have people that want to recommend music to me, and they'll go, well, you're going to hate this, but listen to it anyway. And I go, well, then why preface with, you're going to hate this? Like, don't even, like, then I'm going in with a sour taste. Like, don't do that. Like, and I know a lot of people that do that, like a lot of people. And I agree with you 100%. I think we should always give music the benefit of the doubt, like it, and even if you listen to a record the first time through and you don't like it, give it a few more listens, because stuff grows on you. And in reverse, stuff can like kind of grow out of favor. You might hear something for the first time and go, that's amazing. And then hear it like 5 more times and go, well, and then on the opposite, I know that there's a few albums that I've heard that I love with all my heart. And when I first heard them, I hated them. But how about you, Tommy? What do you think? When you listen to music, do you go in wanting to love the album, or do you kind of go in like,
Yeah, I always go in optimistic. The only thing I really don't go optimistic with is country music. But everything else that I've listened to, because I wasn't a big fan of electronic and EDM music and stuff of that nature until Fam showed me some bands that I ended up liking. Even with country, I didn't really like anyone except for like a Johnny Cash or someone like that. And then my girlfriend Sam, she showed me Chris Stapleton, and I was like, oh, he has an amazing voice, and it's paired with these amazing acoustic guitars and everything like that. So I've always tried to stay open. I think it's important that you give everything a fair chance, because if you don't, then you're just closing your mind off to something that could be your favorite song or could be your favorite album. And I think playing off of that is really important to not just music, but everything else that we try to consume in our lives.
Yeah, and one thing that I just thought of that I think is a huge important thing I want to discuss with you guys. One of the most fascinating things that I've learned just in my time with consuming as much music as I can is an album rollout process can and will determine how you listen to the album if you go in liking it or not. And that is so fascinating to me that marketing plays such a huge role because like even with movies, you can have a bad marketing scheme and like, okay, well, they marketed that movie horribly, but I still love the movie. Music is one of the very few things where if you market something terribly, it actually makes people kind of want to hate the record. Like I know with, oh my gosh, like I love the 1975 with all my heart. I love the band. I think they're a great band. In terms of indie rock, they're probably one of my favorite indie bands, indie sound, not like indie, like do everything, like the sound sonically of indie. Their new album that just came out a few months ago, Notes in a Conditional Form, had historically, I think, one of the most messy album rollout processes I've ever seen in my whole life. And I can count on two hands the amount of people that I know going, well, I'm going to hate this record because this is the messiest thing I've ever seen in my life. And they did. And like, it's not that I don't love or hate the record. There's songs that I love and there's songs that I don't like, but I do think that it's a relatively enjoyable experience. That album, I do enjoy a lot of the music, but like that album in particular, supposed to be called Music for Cars in like December of 2017, pushed it back to 2018, then they released a different album, pushed it back to 2019, released some weird singles that had nothing to do with, like, it's been for 3 years consecutively delayed with like, it was a weird record, but yeah.
One of the albums that I kind of agree with what you're saying with is the album Igor that Tyler the Creator put out. He didn't put out any singles, and he said, listen to this album all the way through, no distractions. And I think him saying that when he released the album, it made me go into it with, all right, he's trying to tell a story. And then as you start to listen, you're like, oh, I kind of see the through line of what he's trying to say. And in a world where we're kind of dominated by singles and hits and everything like that, it was really nice to just take in an album, take in what he's trying to say, take in his new production style. I mean, we got taste of it on Flower Boy, and we got taste of that similar lyrical content, but I feel like this is something he really put his all into, and we heard that and we saw it in the way he released the album.
Brand New did that with Science Fiction, and like, oh, I think if I had to do an album of the decade, it'd either be Science Fiction or The Greatest Generation by the Wonder Years. But and you're right. I think by hyping it up as listen to this album start to finish, the audience goes in, okay, I'm going to probably like this album because it's cohesive, it's full. You know what I mean? Like the marketing in that is actually like pretty, like that's smart marketing. And it blows my mind because scientifically speaking, like I think I read an academic journal on it recently. The way that an album is marketed will actually perceive the way that you hear it. And that's not really true with a lot of other forms of music. You know what I mean? And that's scary how much power marketing has. And a lot of people don't have the willpower to remove themselves from the marketing. Like a lot of people don't have the conscientiousness to think, okay, despite how horribly this was marketed, let me listen to the album. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It is very fascinating. And there's a lot of really cool music studies that I've been reading about like the brain and how we perceive it. And
yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there that we get where maybe you didn't listen to an album when it first came out and everybody hated it, but then you listen back to it and you're like, kind of like what you're saying about with Sum 41 and the other bands. Yeah. You don't get that notion of what happened during the marketing process. So you're just listening it because you want to listen to it. And bringing it back to a movie, I kind of got that with It Comes at Night. A lot of people didn't like that movie because it was marketed as this extremely terrifying movie and everything, but it was this more subtle intellectual movie. And I genuinely loved it because I didn't get that preconceived notion that you're talking about. Unfortunately, we have a little bit of time left. Mm-hmm. This was an amazing conversation, and I really appreciate your passion for talking to us, your passion for movies and music. This is one of my favorite conversations that I've done. I'd like to thank you. I'd like to thank Chris Famulero. I'm Timer Rinaldi. Thank you for watching.